Hi all, welcome back to part 3 of my series for beginners and people new to chess. In this video we're going to focus on asking the question, what is the relative value of the pieces? Okay, so the bishop can go in all directions like this. So you would think it's of reasonable value, you know, it's a very good resource to have. However, one of the problems of the bishop is that it can never go onto the other square. It's limited to colours of a certain diagonal. So here, this is a light squared bishop. Let's contrast that now to the rook. The rook is more versatile because it can actually go to any colour of square. So, in a way, it's more adaptable. And in fact, the rook is given a higher value than the bishop in terms of, you know, a generalization of its usefulness and how you would weigh who is better in a particular position. The rook is actually given 5 points, whilst the bishop that we just saw is actually usually given either 3 or 3.5 if you're being generous to the bishop. Let's look at the knight next. Now the knight in the center can cover a lot of squares. You'll notice the colour of square is actually always opposite to the colour it's on. So you can actually gain access to any colour of square still in just 2 steps. For example, knight f4 to h5 would gain access to another white square. So the knight's kind of versatile. However, let's move the knight to a corner and see what happens. Here the knight is in the corner, and look how many squares it can attack. Only 2. So we see that knights suffer a kind of side effect when it's on the edges of the board. You know, it can only look at 2 squares. In order to wake up the knights, it's better if they're towards the centre. Generously, perhaps, the knights are given the value of 3 points, so same as the bishop. So why would that be? Well, remember that the knights can hop over other pieces. So if the position has lots of pawns to hop over, the knight might be a lot more useful than the bishop. And also the fact it can go on any colour of square potentially, with just a few manoeuvres. So they're quite versatile, but they do have the side effect that on the edges of the board, and especially the corners, they lose value. So they might even be able to be restricted by the opponent's bishop. For example, just imagine if there was a bishop on a5 here. See, that knight would be not only stranded, but you know the bishop would be chopping it as soon as it tried to leave the corner. So it seems the bishops can dominate the knights. Queen is regarded as the most powerful piece on the chessboard. It can move in all directions. And in the centre, like the knight, it radiates in power a lot more. So look at all those squares it has access to immediately. It is the most dangerous piece in attack when trying to checkmate the opponent's king, as a generalisation. The queen is usually given the value of 10 points. So, when we assess positions and we want to establish the material balance, we could count up the total of the material of both sides and gain a kind of score, like a football score. For example, in this position, if we wanted to work out the score of the position intuitively, what we could do is simply count up, using our material value system, that the rook is 5, the queen is 10, or 9, so that's, say the queen's 9 in fact, so 9 and 14, 15, and here 9 plus 3, 12, 13, so white is like 2 pawns up in effect, 2 units up. However, it really depends on the position if this rough guide is actually a good predictor of the game outcome. Often, because of king safety factors, you can often sacrifice material, even your queen sometimes, to deliver checkmate. Because the goal of the game is to checkmate the opponent. It's not just to have materially more material. Once you checkmate the opponent, that's it, you win. There's one piece we didn't factor in to our point system. It's the king. The king is really of infinite value. If you win the opponent's king by checkmate, in effect, then you've won the game. So really, the king is of infinite value. But towards the end game, the king is definitely a viable attacking unit in its own right. So the concept of the king being infinite in value shouldn't put you off using the king in the endgame aggressively, because there's far less likelihood of the king being mated in the endgame. So we said the rook is worth 5, the knight is worth 3, the bishop is 3 to 3.5, the queen is 9, the king is like an infinite value, and the pawn is usually given the value of 1. But it really depends on the position again, because if the pawn reaches like the 7th rank or even the 6th rank, it becomes very dangerous for it being able to promote into a queen. So it really depends on the position, these rough guide material values. The thing about chess is that it really all depends on the position, and the more experience you get, the more you're able to find the exceptions. You know, the opponent's king safety, your pawn's potential to become a queen. All these are dynamic factors which affect the true state of who is winning the position. To demonstrate a really dynamic game, in the second part of this video now, we're going to look at a game of Paul Morphy. Paul Morphy, playing white, kicked off with e4, and after e5 he played knight f3, attacking the opponent's pawn. So note the use of the knight coming towards the centre, not on the edge. Black defended that pawn, so that pawn is now defending the e5 pawn. White further attacked the e5 pawn now with d4, and black played bishop g4. So developing that bishop, usually it's not a good idea to develop bishops before knights. Here, white took the pawn on e5, and black, instead of recapturing on e5, played bishop takes f3. So Morphy took on f3, and after d takes e5, played bishop c4, targeting the vulnerable f7 pawn, threatening mate, in fact. So black defended with knight f6, but now again that weakness was probed by a cunning move from Morphy, queen b3. So you see the bishop and queen are being used together to increase the pressure on f7. So black defended with queen e7, and now Morphy played knight c3. So with knight c3, Morphy is further developing his queenside pieces and preparing to castle queenside, which we saw in the second part video. All he needs to do is move that bishop and he'll be able to castle queenside. After c6 he did actually move that bishop. And black now reacted with b5, attacking the bishop with the pawn. Now we'll see here the first startling sacrifice, which kind of breaks the material values that we just examined. The knight is worth 3, but the knight sacrifices itself actually here. Knight takes b5, so Morphy gives up a whole knight for a pawn. So a 2-pawn deficit in effect. After bishop takes b5 check, knight bd7. We see the dynamic factors of the position though coming into play, because look at black's king safety. The black king is still stranded in the centre. White castled queenside, and black tried to defend d7 now, because the pressure is increasing. White has the option of taking on f6, and because that knight is pinned to the king, it can't recapture. So that would have exposed it to being taken, because this rook is ganging up with this bishop on that d7 knight. But here, Morphy uses another sacrifice to break down black's defences. He plays rook takes d7. The rook, as we saw, is worth 5, the knight is worth 3. So another 2-pawn deficit has been just given to the opponent. So after rook takes d7, Morphy now plays rook d1. But in this position, the dynamics are showing that, you know, these pieces are still hemmed in. They're not developed, and they're a bit useless in those squares. This knight is a bit useless. This rook's a bit useless because they're all pinned. This knight is pinned to the queen. This bishop is pinning that rook to the king. So black tried to trade off queens now to try and relieve some of the pressure. But here, bishop takes d7 was played, and black is forced to do something about the check. And after knight takes d7, here we see a final brilliant move, which allows Morphy to checkmate the opponent. I wonder if you can spot it. I'll give you 5 seconds, starting from now. Morphy played queen b8 check, so he's voluntarily giving up a whole 10 points, the queen worth 10 points, for the knight to just be able to take it, because now there's rook d8 and that is checkmate, the end of the game. It doesn't matter that white is left with 5, 8 and these pawns against a big army of black worth much more, 10, 13, 16, 21, it doesn't matter, because the black king has been checkmated here. It can't move to e7 because of the bishop. It can't take the rook because of the bishop protecting the rook. So that's checkmate. A beautiful game, and demonstrates the relative value of the pieces in the context of other factors such as king safety and the overall game objective, which is to checkmate the opponent's king. I hope you enjoyed that video. Please leave any comments on YouTube. Thanks very much.